Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, we are honored to welcome a remarkable guest, Dr. Malinda Shultice. Welcome.
Thanks for having me today. I'm happy to be here.
It's our pleasure. Is it okay to call you Malinda?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, please do.
I always like to ask, some people.
You're formal.
Yes. For viewers and listeners who may not be familiar with you, Malinda, can you take a moment and just kind of give a brief introduction to who you are and what you do?
Sure. My name's Malinda, and I own M.S. Healthcare Consulting. And part of the reason that I started this company about 1.5 years ago was I managed retirement communities for the past 10 years. And I started that right out of college and have done that ever since, and decided a couple of years ago to pivot and start teaching in academia. But then I also felt that pull that senior living just gives you. It doesn't ever leave you the same person when you leave the industry. So I created a company that helps people to address their leadership and development woes that senior living just inadvertently experiences constantly. And so I help create workshops and tailored plans for leadership development and to address turnover, burnout, all of those things that we hear so regularly in the industry. So that's what I really try to tackle in my day-to-day when I'm not teaching.
Okay, great. Well, I want to kind of stick with that. When you teach senior living leaders, how do you explain the difference between managing tasks and leading with curiosity, compassion, and empathy?
Yeah, there's such a fine line when it comes to that, to be honest, because there are certain times in the day as the leader, you just have to answer the question and give them what they need and move on. But there's also, a lot of the burnout that we see from these high level leaders in senior living comes from the fact that we are not very good at providing this accountability factor for our teams. And some of that curiosity to help empower others is what I try to focus on, because if we can help other people grow and be better versions of themselves, we have time to free up ourselves as leaders to be more strategic, be more curious in our own growth instead of constantly trying to fix everyone else's issues and concerns throughout the day. And so, like I said, there's that fine line that exists between giving the team the tools they need, and sometimes that's just a direct response from you, but we also, as the leader, need to lean into that curiosity and better understand our teams and how we can make them accountable and help them grow in their own roles, which frees up time for us to do the things that we love in our own jobs in senior living. So there is that fine line, but as the leader, you owe it to your team to help them be the best versions of themselves. And curiosity is really what starts that process as a leader.
Yeah, I want to stick there just for a minute. I know you kind of touched on it a little bit, but maybe we could go a little bit deeper on the role of curiosity. What role does that curiosity play in helping these leaders truly understand the daily experiences of residents, family, and even the staff?
That's a great question. And to be honest, curiosity is at the core of everything we could and should be doing as a leader. And it's very simplistic in terms of what curiosity can look like in our day-to-day. And at the most basic level, it deals with being an effective communicator with our peers, our families, our residents. We have to be curious enough as a leader to understand how we can meet their needs. And sometimes we just have to take, 5 minutes out of our day and have a basic conversation with someone and be fully engaged in that conversation. That's where we oftentimes fail, is we are passively listening and we're missing the heart of the matter that person is trying to tell us. And so oftentimes as a leader, we can solve something pretty quickly if we actually take a moment to be curious enough about the conversation and be engaged in what it is we're hearing, instead of thinking about the 56 emails we have the 4 meetings we're already late to, because that's what we do, especially in senior living. We never have enough time. And so by not tapping into that curiosity and giving ourselves those few moments of time throughout the day that actually reminds us of why we're in the job we're in, we're doing ourselves a disservice and our residents and families the same, because we're just not giving them our most curious and engaged and active selves.
Yeah.
So really, communication is at the core of how that curiosity really plays out in that day to day.
Yeah. And I would add to that having the right Zoom link for meetings too, right?
Yes, of course, always.
And I really like this because, we own a fairly large home care company, though it's not defined as senior living. It's still, an aspect of senior care. And, I think, curiosity, compassion, and empathy are very vital, I think, uniquely specific to this industry. I don't need to be that empathetic if I am, running a retail business, right? I don't have to have a lot of curiosity. Compassion may or may not play into my day-to-day role, but I think in senior care overall, these are like the three big pillars, in my opinion. And I want a lot of leaders to have that compassion, that curiosity, and especially the empathy. But many leaders want to be compassionate, but what does compassion look like in a decision making at the executive level of senior living?
That's a great question because there, especially in senior living, there exists, people are almost scared or not sure how to navigate these difficult soft skills. It's much easier to hire someone as a leader for the hard skills. We can go through the checklist to make sure they know how to do X, Y, and Z, but how do we hire someone and really hold ourselves as a leader to the standard to be empathetic, curious, and compassionate? Because those are harder to measure. These are not tangible things you can check off. And so really at the core of it, we have to determine that we want to be the type of leader who is open, vulnerable, and willing to be an active listener with our team. And we have to be okay with feedback, good, bad, or indifferent as a leader. And oftentimes we think we have to be the subject matter expert. But what empathy and curiosity opens up, if you go into your day with that mindset of, taking it off of your shoulders, that you don't have to have the answer to everything. And you can really lean on your team if we're empowering them to find solutions and be problem solvers without constantly needing us for everything, because we do that inadvertently. We cripple people accidentally because we have them come to us for everything. But if we can go in with a mindset of curiosity in our day to day, with the conversations we're having, with the interactions that we're having, that really leads to this really healthy culture. And it's not difficult to do. It just really goes back to being present in the conversations you're having, being present in the moments that you are actually in, rather than constantly worrying about how we're behind. And that's how, one day after another just leads to that culmination of burnout, because you're always behind. You always feel behind. And we lose that sight and that traction of why we got into the industry to begin with, oftentimes, because we have taken away those moments of creativity and curiosity throughout our day because we're just worried about all the tasks we have to accomplish. But we fail to remember that we're in the business of humans and people, and we need that connection and that empathy. So we have to decide as leaders that we're going to prioritize that every day. And some people don't even know where to start. I get that question all the time. Where do I even start? And I always tell people to find 2 to 3, 4 moments throughout the day where you can find 5 minutes to be actively engaged in a conversation or whatever it is you're doing, and then make that a habit. And then you can add on that. And before you know it, we don't have time to be therapists for people. We don't. But you fill your cup while you're filling theirs. And we deserve that in order to make our teams be more engaged. And we reduce our own burnout inadvertently. And so we really have to decide that that's the type of leader we're going to be. And it really depends on how engaged we're willing to let ourselves be in the conversations and the interactions that we're having.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask this next question, but I want to circle back then to the curiosity, compassion, and empathy. How can, excuse me, how can senior living leaders use empathy to create these cultures where the staff feel valued and residents feel deeply cared for? Because, it starts at the top. You got to have that culture.
Does. It does. You have to decide as the leader because whether leaders want to feel that pressure or not, you set the tone for the day, the team, the environment. And people have to be willing to accept that pressure as the leader. I so often, it's unfortunate that I hear it all the time. I'd hear it from nurses, I'd hear it from CNAs, I'd hear it from plan ops people. They had never even met, the executive director or the director of nursing. They didn't even know who they were, which that is not being an effective leader because you need to be present, you need to be engaged. People need to know that you are a human outside of being a leader. And that hierarchical mindset really can be difficult to navigate through if you really want to differentiate yourselves from your team. And so, when it comes to empathy and compassion, us being able to connect with people just on a human level can help them to grow, but it also helps to make the community or the healthcare setting function in such a healthier way
Right.
because they see us as just the people that we are. So we have to be vulnerable enough as leaders to be willing to show that and be wrong and admit we're wrong publicly sometimes. We have to be okay with not having all of the answers, but being there to support our team, sometimes not as a leader, but just as a person. And so this might sound very simplistic, and it really is, but we oftentimes don't do it very well as leaders because we think we don't have the time. But we have to decide as a leader, especially in healthcare, because we're dealing with people, we have to make time for this. Otherwise, we burn out and dim our own light, and then we're not effective for anyone in our sphere of influence.
Right. And you alluded to, using time as an excuse. I'm a big believer in you make time for things that are important.
Yes.
But do you think that's often even used just as an excuse because they don't buy into that mindset?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I
that,
think you hit the nail on the head with that.
yeah, so I wanted to follow up there with the compassion, empathy, and, curiosity. In your role when you're going in and trying to educate people and implement this approach, I can't sadly believe that it's welcomed all that often just because, people, they feel like that's not my job. I'm the administrator, I'm the executive. How do you tackle that when you get that kind of pushback? Like, how do you get them to buy in?
Yeah, honestly, it a lot of it has to show in the data. So it's very easy for me to be able to prove to someone, what does your employee engagement survey look like? What does your data for, exit surveys when people are leaving? What did they give you for data? What is the feedback from, some people have pulse surveys that they send out to their staff or the residents' families throughout the year just to gauge where they are with their level of happiness. And 9 times out of 10, there is great room for improvement, not a little bit of improvement, great room for improvement. And so those people that think that these soft skills are difficult to implement or that they don't matter as a leader, especially, the data doesn't lie. And so for those people that are naysayers or don't understand the importance of this, you're never going to fully have a healthy culture or be your most effective self as a leader if you don't come to the realization that these things do matter almost more than anything else in your day. Because whatever you're exuding and putting out there as a leader is what you're going to get back. And, people are always going to be sick. We're always going to be struggling to find staffing, but we are never going to get off this hamster wheel of chaos in healthcare if we don't start to prioritize some of these soft skills.
Right.
And, I think it was Harvard that just published a study almost a year ago at this time that said most employers, not just healthcare in general, are looking for about 85% of employers are looking and hiring for the soft skill capability of people because you don't see that very often. And you're right. The barriers that people don't want to admit that they may not be empathetic and people don't, or they don't know how to even tackle it. So I give them very practical skills and tools that they can use in their day to day that doesn't take up a ton of time either, because as leaders we don't have a ton of time, but we have to make time for what matters, and this should matter, and the data usually supports it even if they don't want to admit it. So that's kind of how I tackle the naysayers that aren't really on board with it.
So what are some of the other common barriers? What are some common barriers that healthcare leaders face when they're trying to lead with empathy and compassion, and how do you help them overcome it?
Sometimes when, I didn't realize that I was an empathetic leader until after I left the industry, because I was trying to better understand how I had had the successes I had had and how I could help other people. If people are not vulnerable enough to be willing to accept it, you deal with a lot of people, a lot of the staff in healthcare have had a lot of trauma themselves. And then they're trying to go to work and care for other people when they can barely care for themselves. So some people are not receptive because they have their own struggles in day-to-day life and they're not ready to deal with that. The other element is, we have a very culturally diverse healthcare system. And sometimes as leaders, we're also not very good at helping people to feel like they can be their truest selves, and whatever that culture they come from in the workplace. So we have to create that environment where people feel like they can be their true self, especially if they, are just recently here. And so you would think that a lot of people would be open to this, but it is hard to be honest with yourself about room for improvement that you need and being open and willing to accept it. And the leaders are the ones that have the hardest time accepting it. Usually my team, on the floor, were so willing to be open with me, and they just liked to see that humanness in me. But leaders have the highest level of resistance because they don't want to admit it, or it's hard to admit, or they don't know they have a problem sometimes. And so there's, just that being self-aware enough and emotionally intelligent enough to know that you have room for growth is one of the biggest barriers that I deal with, because people, like I said, are not always aware or want to be honest with themselves about it. It's hard to hear you need to improve.
Right.
And sometimes people take that well and sometimes they don't.
And I want to kind of stick here for a minute before we move on. When you were talking about, employees, having trauma and, experiences, I don't know that this would be necessarily a correlation, but for our company, we have a really high retention rate, and that's because we really do care. And, there's times where you have to play boss and there's times where you can play friend, right?
Yeah.
So we were interviewing somebody a couple weeks ago, and this one I actually was sitting in on because it was a potential hire, and the person was, giving us great answers, and, we were giving her some culture information about the company benefits and different things. And she said, I don't mean to sound rude. She said, but, the last place I worked at, she goes, they said the same thing. And I said, that's okay. I said, we want people to judge us based on our actions, not our words.
Yes.
I said, but right now you don't have any actions you can base it off of. So just base it off our words. I said, but I flipped it around on her and I said, but I could say the same thing about you. I could say, the last person we interviewed and we hired said all these wonderful things. They had this availability, these credentials, and they just flaked out. I go, I'm not holding their actions against you because you're not them. So don't hold your previous employer against us because we're us and they are them. And, that really hit home with her, and I think sometimes people, they take those past experiences, which, we have to do that. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. But I think sometimes too, they hang on to it and they're not able to move past it. So when they see a company that has empathy and compassion and, or whatever you want to describe it as, it takes some convincing too. So when you have that leadership from the top down, having that culture within the company, you get that higher retention rate. You're going to get higher, patient satisfaction scores. You're going to get all of that. So I don't see why nobody would ever not want to implement your advice and, these skills that you're trying to share.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, Malinda, I'd love for you to give us one practical exercise that a healthcare leader could use to strengthen their curiosity muscle What would that look like? And, maybe even provide some storytelling and examples.
So, one of the things that I always have people do when I'm at a conference, and it's always funny to watch this, I ask people to take 5 minutes, and one person's going to be the active listener, and one person is going to be the talker. And you can just see the look on people's face. Some are just sheer panic, and some are happiness. The person listening needs to not give their opinion. They cannot make statements, and they need to focus on trying to ask open ended questions, which will force your brain to be quiet and tap into that curiosity that maybe has been deadened along the time. The talker, oftentimes, one of two things happens. They don't have enough time because 5 minutes isn't enough time, because very, very infrequently do people get to talk about themselves or their experiences for 5 minutes uninterrupted. Or people, that 5 minutes sounds horrific and I don't want to talk. And regardless of, and then I ask them to switch. And so that is a practical tool that any leader can take 5 minutes out of their day. Go talk to a nurse, go talk to your home care aide, go talk to your plan ops manager, and take 5 minutes and be that active listener. You don't have to announce that you're going to do it, but the better off you can be about practicing this, it inherently becomes part of who you are, which reignites that curiosity spark that we all kind of lose along the way. And almost all of the feedback that I get, some people are just uncomfortable with it because they're not open to it right now. Almost everyone feels just appreciative to have been listened to for 5 minutes. And then the other people that have to listen struggle to have their brain quiet enough to be engaged in the moment, which is just 5 minutes. But that just tells you how busy and inundated we are in a day as leaders, that we don't even gift ourselves a moment to be active and present in what it is we're doing. And so it's no wonder that we're all burned out. We're all frazzled. We're all tired. We all feel like we get home and we have nothing left to give. It's because we've taken pretty much every ounce of humanness out of our day to be able to connect. And you don't even have to talk about anything deep, but you would be amazed in 5 minutes what people are willing to open up with when they know they have the floor. So it's a very practical step that anyone can try to implement. And, if you can take it beyond 5 minutes, by all means do it. But just doing that a couple times throughout the day will help to reignite that curiosity spark that we all need as leaders. And you'd be amazed how much it helps with our relationships, and resident satisfaction, employee satisfaction. All of those things can be positively impacted very quickly with implementing this practice.
Yeah. Do you ever find that, it's hard to get more executive level people to even share and talk? I'm sure they can maybe listen, but actually engaging in that kind of exercise?
Yes, actually, they're the first ones that want to act like they have a fake call and they want to leave. And it's disappointing because, they should be the pillar of what this should look like in the day to day. And you can always tell when you walk into a company what those C-suite executives are like based off of the team that's around them. And because they create that culture, whether and they're a huge key player in this, but they are always the ones, I shouldn't say always, most of the time, they're the ones who want to run the other way. They do not want to do this. They don't want to be open and vulnerable. They've lost that sense of looking human to their team. And that is such a disservice, especially in healthcare, because we are in the business of people and we have to be able to take care of our teams and connect with them just as well as we do with families and residents. And that is where healthcare needs to heal and improve and prioritize these things. And senior leaders especially need to be more connective in this way and authentic with their interactions. So it is funny you ask that question because they are usually the first ones that act like they have a fake phone call and run because they don't want to do it. They don't want to do it.
Yeah, no, I can see that. We've talked about a lot of the exercises and, the approaches and, some of the, negative side of the difficulties of getting it implemented. But let's talk about the positive. Can you share a story where a senior living leader transformed their approach after embracing curiosity, compassion, and empathy?
I had an individual because I talk at a variety of home care, hospitals, long-term care, doesn't matter. this gal came to two of my different speaking events. And the first one, she was pretty quiet, and she runs a home care agency. And the second one, she spoke up and said, I have an autistic son, and he was having a really bad evening, and I practiced your active listening methods, and he completely calmed down and I calmed down, and now we've used it every day since, and it's completely changed the trajectory of my day to day. So not only does this help in people's professional lives, but it helps in their personal lives too, which is amazing. And so that has stuck out to me. And she started crying in front of everyone. And it's one of those moments that you hope that you're resonating, but to actually hear it making such a big impact in someone's day-to-day life is exactly what you hope for. And, so that's the one that sticks out to me the most, because it just happened a couple of weeks ago. I've had other leaders that have said that they have never felt more connected with their team. They're not really worried about what the data shows because they feel better as a leader. And they feel better as a person, which, again, that's the feedback that I hope I'm getting, because if we can start to reduce some of this, low morale and these burnout rates because of these simplistic practices, and it doesn't cost a lot of money and it doesn't take a lot of time, it can really change the trajectory of someone's personal and their professional life.
Yeah. And, having a company, I don't know that the cost would matter when you look at what the benefit is. Your higher retention rate, better patient, client satisfaction scores, better culture. I mean, I don't know that you can put a price on something like that, right? Speaking of your services, where would you like, and all this will be in our show notes as well, and we're going to tag you on social media, where would you like people to go to learn more about you?
They can go to my website, malindashultice.com, or they can find me on LinkedIn. I am a LinkedIn junkie. I love to connect on there. The world of LinkedIn is very interesting. There's some really incredible people on there. So either LinkedIn, or you can go to my website that has my email address on there too.
Perfect. And we'll have it in the show notes for you as well. But I want to just, looking ahead, why do you believe that curiosity, compassion, and empathy will be even more essential for healthcare leaders in senior living and beyond?
As our population ages, which it is doing rapidly, we are not filling these gaps in the employment that we need to in order to meet the needs of our aging population. And people are just getting more complex, and we are not, we could, in theory, meet their needs if we can implement some of these soft skill practices, but we have to be open enough to do it and accept that we need to improve as healthcare leaders. So that's really the important message I'm trying to get out there, is we need to get ahead of this now before our population ages to the point where we can't meet very few needs, and people are falling through the cracks because we don't have enough, personnel to be able to meet the needs of the population. So it's really dire at this point that we start doing something about it and be proactive rather than reactive. Healthcare tends to be very reactive, but we have a chance now to be proactive and implement these basic processes that can help to build a healthy culture that will inadvertently be able to meet the needs of our aging population. So it's kind of a let's pay attention to it now rather than later situation.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Well, Dr. Malinda Shultice, founder and CEO of M.S. Healthcare Consulting, thank you so much for what you're doing. I tremendously believe in this approach, and this is so needed in healthcare, and really I think just society as a whole. Let's be real. I mean, I think we can all be a little more empathetic and a little more curious and show some compassion. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I had a great time.
Always. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also like to say thank you again to Dr. Malinda Shultice for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again here at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.